The morning Elias Crane rode out to the eastern ridge of his property, he wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for strays. 3 head of cattle had wandered off during the night, spooked by something, thunder, maybe, or the kind of deep, sourceless sound the desert made when it had something to say. Elias had been ranching the Flat Rock spread for 11 years, and he knew that sound. He didn't like it. The sun was barely a suggestion on the horizon when he spotted movement near the canyon wall, a figure, crouched low in the scrub brush. Hands working quickly through the thorned branches of the wild berry thickets that grew along the rock face. Small hands? A woman's hands. He pulled his horse to a stop. She hadn't heard him. Or she was pretending she hadn't. Both possibilities made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This was his land. Every inch of it, from the dry creek bed to the northern fence line, had been paid for in blood, drought, and years of silence so complete it could swallow a man whole. Nobody came out here without a reason. And in Elias Crane's experience, reasons this far from town were rarely good ones. He rested his hand on the butt of his revolver. The woman looked up. Their eyes met across 30 feet of still morning air. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't do any of the things a person does when they'd been caught doing something wrong. She simply looked at him, steady, unflinching, like she'd been waiting for him. And then she said something that made Elias Crane feel like the ground had been pulled from under his boots. What she said would change everything he thought he knew about his land, his past, and the 11 years of silence he'd built his life around. The eastern ridge of Flat Rock wasn't the kind of place people wandered into by accident. To get there from town, you had to ride nearly 9 miles through open scrubland, cross the dry fork of Kettle Creek, which wasn't dry in spring. And this was spring, and then navigate a stretch of broken shale that could lame a horse if you didn't know the right path through it. Elias knew the path. He'd worn it himself over a decade of morning rides, of checking fences and counting cattle and talking to nobody. He was good at talking to nobody. The woman was maybe 30, or maybe she was younger and life had put years on her face the way drought puts cracks in dry earth. She wore a plain brown dress that had been washed so many times the color had given up trying. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and there were scratches on her forearms from the berry thorns, fresh ones, red and vivid against her brown skin. A cloth bag hung from her shoulder, already half full of the small, dark berries that grew wild along the canyon wall. Juniper berries. Bitter things. You only ate them when you didn't have a choice. Elias kept his hand near his revolver, but he didn't draw. He wasn't the kind of man who drew on women. He also wasn't the kind of man who let strangers work his land without an explanation. "That's private property you're standing on," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. It usually did. 11 years of mostly silence had made his words feel like rocks, heavy and awkward, dropped from too great a height. The woman didn't flinch. She looked at him the way you look at something you've seen before and aren't afraid of. Like a hawk looking at weather. "I know," she said. 2 words. Calm as still water. Elias shifted in the saddle. "Then you know you're trespassing." "I do. So what are you doing out here?" She reached into the thicket and pulled another cluster of berries loose, placed them carefully in her bag. Like he hadn't said anything. Like his question had been a gust of wind, notable but not requiring response. "My name is Rosa Delgado," she said. "My grandmother is sick. These berries, boiled down with water and dried root, will bring her fever down. I'll be gone before the sun gets high." Elias studied her. She wasn't afraid of him. That alone made her unusual. Most people who wandered onto Flat Rock by accident were terrified when he appeared. A big man on a big horse, jaw like a plank of weathered oak, eyes the color of old iron. He'd been told before that he had the kind of face that looked like it was built for bad news. But Rosa Delgado looked at him like she was reading a page she'd already read. "There are berry thickets closer to town," he said. "Meadow Creek. Half the distance." "I know," she said again. So why ride 9 miles out here? She stopped picking. She turned and looked at him fully for the first time, and something in her expression shifted, not into fear, but into something more complicated. Something that had weight to it. Because these berries grow better here, she said. They always have. My grandmother used to come here herself, years ago, when she was young. Before. She stopped. A pause so precise it felt intentional. Before things changed. Elias felt something move in his chest. Something cold. Before what things changed? Rosa looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was coming up stronger now, painting the canyon wall amber and rust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called once and went quiet. Before this became your land, she said. The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Simple. Quiet. And somehow capable of disturbing everything beneath the surface. Elias stared at her. She went back to picking berries. He sat on his horse in the growing light, hands still resting near his gun, feeling for the first time in 11 years like the man who didn't belong here. And she hadn't even told him the worst part yet. Elias Crane was not a man who invited people into his home. The ranch house at Flat Rock was built for function, not comfort, a single-story structure of thick adobe and rough timber, more wall than window. Designed to keep the heat out in summer and the cold out in winter. There was a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a shelf of books he'd read so many times the spines had crumbled. There were no photographs. No decorations. Nothing on the walls except a survey map of the property, pinned with 4 nails and annotated in his own cramped handwriting. He brought Rosa Delgado inside anyway. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way she'd said before this became your land, like a door had opened and he couldn't close it without knowing what was on the other side. Maybe it was because she was clearly exhausted, and her horse, tied at the canyon base, looked like it had been ridden hard. Maybe it was because, for the first time in 11 years, something on Flat Rock felt like it was about to speak. He poured water from the clay jug on the counter. She drank it without ceremony. How far is your grandmother? He asked. 3 miles south of Redemption, she said. Small house, near the old mission wall. Redemption. That was 12 miles from here. She'd ridden 12 miles before sunrise to pick berries from a canyon wall on a stranger's land. Tell me about before, he said. He sat down at the table across from her. He didn't soften his voice, but he made it level. That was the closest he could manage to gentle. You started to say something out there. Rosa set her cup down. She looked at the survey map on the wall for a moment, studying it with an expression he couldn't quite name. My grandmother's family lived on this land, she said. Not here, not on the ranch itself. Farther east toward the canyon. There was a settlement there, maybe 20 families. Mostly her people. They'd been there for 3 generations. Had water rights to the creek. Had an agreement with the county. Elias said nothing. He was listening the way a man listens when he's afraid of what's coming next. In 1871, Rosa continued, a land agent came through. Said the territory was being redistributed. Said the old land grants weren't valid anymore. Said the agreement wasn't worth the paper it was written on. She paused. Most families left. A few tried to stay. They were persuaded to leave. She said the word persuaded the way you say a word that means something much uglier. I bought this land in 1872, Elias said. I know. I bought it legal. From the county land office. Paid fair price. I know, she said, and her voice didn't carry accusation, which almost made it worse. Accusation he could defend himself against. This quiet knowing, had nowhere to push back against. My grandmother doesn't blame you. She's never blamed you. She doesn't even know I'm here. She just. Rosa looked down at the cloth bag of berries on the table between them. She's been asking for berries from the canyon wall for 3 days. She says they taste different there. She says they taste like home. The silence between them stretched out long and thin. Elias looked at the survey map on the wall. He'd pinned it up the first week he arrived, when he was 26 years old and full of the particular pride a man feels when he holds a deed in his hands for the first time. He'd memorized every line of it. The eastern ridge. The canyon wall. The dry creek fork. He never once wondered what was there before the map was drawn. "What's your grandmother's name?" he asked. "Esperanza," Rosa said. "Esperanza Vega." Something moved through the room. Not quite wind. Not quite sound. But present. Elias stood. He walked to the survey map and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he turned around. "How sick is she?" "Very," Rosa said. And for the first time since he'd found her at the canyon wall, something cracked just slightly in her composure. Just the smallest fracture. "The doctor in Redemption came twice. Said there was nothing more to do. She just keeps asking for the berries." Elias picked up the cloth bag from the table and handed it back to her. "Take what you need," he said. "Come back as often as you have to." She looked at him steadily. Why? It was a fair question. He wasn't sure he had a fair answer. So he gave her the only one that felt true. "Because some debts," he said slowly, like the words were being formed in real time from something raw and unfinished inside him, "don't come with a bill. They just sit there. And you can ignore them, or you can try to do something about them. Even if what you do is small." Rosa Delgado looked at him for a long moment. "She'll want to meet you," she said. "I figured," he said. He didn't say whether that frightened him. But it did. He didn't sleep that night. He lay on his cot in the thick dark of the ranch house and stared at the ceiling and let his mind do what minds do when something long buried gets disturbed. It started moving things around. Opening drawers he'd kept shut. Pulling out receipts and memories and half-formed questions he trained himself not to ask. He'd bought Flat Rock in the spring of 1872 from a county land agent named Gerald Holt. Holt had been a thin man with a thin mustache and the kind of smile that lived only on the surface of the face, like oil on water. The transaction had taken less than an hour. Elias had signed his name on 4 documents. Paid $260 in cash, every dollar he had in the world at the time, and walked out of the county office with a deed in his pocket and no idea what he was walking into. He'd been 26. He'd just come back from 3 years driving cattle across Kansas with a crew that was down to 6 men by the time they reached the end of the trail. He'd been ready to stop moving. Ready to plant himself somewhere and grow. He'd never asked why the land was available. He'd never asked who had been there before. He'd just been grateful something was available he could afford. In the morning, he saddled up before dawn. He didn't go east toward the cattle. He went south, toward the canyon wall, and then farther, past the shale field, past the dry creek fork, out to the eastern boundary of his property where the land started to slope toward a shallow, brush-choked valley he'd never had much reason to explore. He found it in less than an hour. The ruins were small, barely visible under 11 years of overgrowth. But they were there. Foundation stones, laid in careful rows. The charred remains of what had been a wooden structure, now just black lines in the dirt, like the ghost of a floor plan. A stone-lined well, dry and half-collapsed. And a few feet from the well, something that made him get off his horse and crouch down in the dirt. A cross. Handmade from 2 pieces of dark wood lashed together with leather cord. Weathered nearly to nothing, leaning at an angle, but still standing. No name. No date. Just the cross. He stayed crouched in the dirt for a long time. He was still there when he heard hoofbeats. He stood and turned. A rider was coming from the south, not fast, but purposeful. A man, heavy-set, riding a gray horse. As the rider got closer, Elias recognized the face under the hat brim, Ward Callow. Owner of the Triple C, the largest spread in the county, with land running all the way from the North Ridge to the river. Ward Callow, who had made 3 separate offers to buy Flat Rock over the years, each one turned down, each rejection met with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Callow reined up 20 feet away. He looked at the ruins, then at Elias, then back at the ruins with the expression of a man who has just seen something he didn't expect to see. "Crane," he said. "Callow," Elias said. "Didn't know you came out this far. My property goes this far." Callow's smile surfaced, that familiar surface-only smile. "Sure it does. Just saying. Long ride for a morning. What are you doing on my land, Ward?" A pause. Something shifted behind Callow's eyes, like a calculation being performed. "Saw a rider this morning. Coming from your direction. Woman. Wanted to make sure nothing was wrong." "Nothing's wrong. Who was she?" Elias looked at him. He let the silence run a few beats longer than comfortable. "A neighbor," he said. "Coming to pick berries." Callow's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. They dropped to the ruins, to the cross in the dirt. And something in his expression changed in a way that was very subtle and very telling, like a man who has just been reminded of something he'd successfully forgotten. "You know what this place is?" Callow asked. "I'm starting to figure it out," Elias said. Another pause. Longer this time. "You ought to be careful, Crane. This county has a long memory. And some things that got settled once don't need to be unsettled." He said it plainly, without overt menace, but plainly. Elias felt the familiar weight of his revolver at his hip. He didn't touch it. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. Callow tipped his hat. He turned his horse and rode back south. Elias watched him go. Then he looked back at the cross in the dirt. Some things that got settled once don't need to be unsettled. He knew a warning when he heard one. He also knew, for the first time with absolute clarity, that Ward Callow knew exactly what had happened to the families who had lived here. More than likely, Callow had been part of making it happen. The question now was what Elias Crane intended to do about it. Redemption was the kind of town that had been named by optimists and inherited by realists. It had a main street wide enough for 2 wagons to pass without touching, a saloon that doubled as a courthouse when needed, a church with a cracked bell that rang slightly off-key, and a population of about 400 souls who had learned to survive the gap between what the land promised and what it delivered. It wasn't a bad town. It wasn't a good one. It was a real one, which meant it contained multitudes, generosity and cruelty living side by side, sometimes in the same person. Elias rode in on a Thursday, which was the least eventful day in any frontier town, and found the house Rosa had described, small adobe, near the crumbled remnant of the old mission wall, with a string of dried chili peppers hanging by the door. Rosa opened the door before he could knock. She looked surprised to see him. The surprise passed quickly, replaced by something quieter and harder to name. "She's awake," Rosa said. "She has good hours and bad ones. This is a good one." The interior of the house was small but deliberate. Every object in it had been placed with care: clay pots, folded textiles in deep reds and browns, a wooden santo on a shelf, candles burned down to stubs. It smelled of dried herbs and something sweet and medicinal. It smelled like somewhere that had been lived in by someone for a very long time. Esperanza Vega was small. That was the first thing. She was sitting up in a narrow bed near the window, her white hair loose around her shoulders, her hands resting on the blanket like 2 birds that had settled after a long flight. Her face was a landscape, deep-lined, dark, every crease a record of something survived. Her eyes were sharp and very black. She looked at Elias the way Rosa had looked at him at the canyon wall. Like she'd seen him before. Or something like him. "Sit down," she said, in English that carried the careful precision of someone who had learned the language as an adult and refused to be careless with it. He sat. "Rosa told me who you are," she said. "Flat Rock. Elias Crane. Yes, ma'am. She nodded slowly. I knew the man who bought that land, she said. Before you. Gerald Holt. You know this name? The agent who sold it to me. Not the agent, Esperanza said. The man who arranged for it to be sold. There is a difference. She looked at him steadily. Holt worked for Ward Callow. He always worked for Ward Callow. Before he was a land agent, he was Callow's foreman. The county redistribution, the one that made our land available, Callow pushed for that. Wrote letters. Paid people. Arranged things. Elias listened. He didn't interrupt. Our families had a Spanish land grant, she continued. From before Texas was Texas. Very old paper. Very legal. But in 1871, the commissioner said it wasn't recognized. Said new American law superseded it. Our men went to argue. 2 of them were put in jail for disturbing the peace. She paused. One of them was my husband. The room was very quiet. He came home, she said, reading the question in his silence. But he wasn't the same man who left. He died the following winter. From a cold, the doctor said. She looked at her hands. He died from what had been done to him, is what I say. I'm sorry, Elias said. The words were inadequate. He knew they were inadequate. He said them anyway because some truths deserve to be acknowledged even when the acknowledgement is insufficient. Callow got the land he wanted, the north pasture, the water rights, the ridge access. You got the rest. The part he didn't need. The part with the ruins and the cross. She looked at him then with a directness that was almost physical. Did you know? No, he said. I didn't know any of it. She studied him for a long moment, long enough that he felt the full weight of being examined by someone who had excellent reasons to be skeptical of men who claimed not to know things. I believe you, she said finally. Ignorance is not the same as innocence. But it is also not the same as guilt. What do you want me to do? He asked. She tilted her head. I am a dying woman. I am not asking for land back. That time has passed. What is done, and I am old enough to know that the past does not return, it only sits beside us. She reached toward the nightstand and picked up a small bundle, dried herbs tied with string. Fragrant and dark. I want you to know, she said. I want someone on that land to know what is there. Under your feet. In the soil. The names that were there before the map was drawn. She pressed the herb bundle into his hand. He accepted it. There are names, she said. I will tell Rosa. She will write them down for you. Names of the families. Names of the children who were born there. She held his gaze. So someone remembers. He nodded. Outside, a wind moved through the chili peppers hanging at the door, making a dry, rattling sound like a deck of cards being shuffled. On the ride back to Flat Rock, Elias thought about names. About how a map could claim everything and record nothing. About how the land he'd called his for 11 years had never stopped belonging, in some essential and unrecordable way, to the people who had shaped it before him. He also thought about Ward Callow. And he thought about what a man was obliged to do when he discovered that the foundation of his life had been built on someone else's wreckage. The answer wasn't simple. It never was. But it was beginning to form. Elias knew Ward Callow would come. He didn't know exactly when, or exactly how. But he knew. Because Callow was the kind of man who treated other people's business as his own the moment it threatened to become inconvenient. He'd shown up at the ruins with a warning. Elias hadn't heeded the warning. In Callow's world, that created a problem that needed resolving. He waited 3 days. On the 3rd day, they came not as one man but as 4. Elias was mending fence along the western line, his back to the road, when he heard the horses. He didn't turn immediately. He finished driving the staple into the post, a practiced, unhurried strike of the hammer, and then he turned. Ward Callow rode in the center. 2 hired men flanked him, both carrying rifles rested across their saddles in the casual way that is meant to look casual but isn't. A 4th man rode slightly behind, a younger man, fair-haired, with the edgy, eager look of someone who had been told today was the day he'd get to prove something. Elias set his hammer down on the fence post. He did not touch his revolver. "Ward," he said. "Elias." Callow dismounted. He was a big man, gone soft in the middle but still carrying the frame of someone who'd done hard physical work when he was younger. He walked toward Elias with his hands loose at his sides, a man performing ease. "Heard you went into redemption. Heard you visited the Vega woman." News traveled fast in small counties. Elias had known it would. "I did," he said. "Like to know what you two talked about." "I imagine you would." Callow stopped 10 feet away. He looked at Elias the way a man looks at a fence post he's thinking about pulling up. "You're a good rancher, Elias. I've always said that. You took that piece of land and made something of it." "I respect that." "I do." The word but hung in the air, unsaid but enormous. "But you're about to stick your hand into something that doesn't concern you. Something that was settled a long time ago." "Was it settled?" Elias said. "Or was it just finished?" Callow's jaw tightened. "Just slightly." "There's no difference." "There's all the difference in the world." A moment passed. The hired men on horseback were still. The young fair-haired one shifted his rifle, and Elias noted the movement without looking directly at it. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for Flat Rock," Callow said. "Better than the last 3. Enough to buy yourself a proper spread somewhere else. Somewhere without history." "All land has history," Elias said. "The history of mine is exactly why I'm not selling." Callow looked at him for a long count. Then he said quietly, "You're going to make an enemy, Elias." "Seems like I may have already had one," Elias said. "I just didn't know it." What happened next happened quickly. The fair-haired young man, perhaps interpreting the conversation as having reached its end, perhaps acting on an instruction given beforehand, began to raise his rifle. Elias drew. He was not a fast man by reputation. He had never built a name around his speed with a gun. But he was precise, and he was calm, and the gap between those things and pure speed was smaller than most men understood. The revolver was leveled and cocked before the rifle barrel had cleared horizontal. Everyone froze. Elias spoke directly to the young man. "Put it down." The young man looked at Callow. Callow said nothing. His expression had changed. The performance of ease was gone, replaced by the actual face of the man underneath, which was calculating and cold and very much unaccustomed to moments it couldn't control. Slowly, the rifle was lowered. Elias kept his revolver out. He looked at Callow. "You're going to leave now," he said. "And you're going to ride back to your spread, and you're going to leave me and the Vega family alone. That's what's going to happen." "And if it doesn't?" Callow said. "I have documents," Elias said. "Esperanza Vega has documents. The original land grant. Letters. Records of what Holt did in 1871, who paid him, who authorized it. They'd been in safekeeping for 11 years. He paused to let that weight settle. "I've already written to the land commissioner in Austin. I did it the morning after I visited Mrs. Vega. Whatever happens to me out here today, that letter is already on its way." It was a gamble. Not everything he'd said was true. But enough of it was. And Callow, who was not a stupid man, understood that the variable had changed in ways that couldn't be solved with 4 horses and a raised rifle. He held Elias's gaze for another long beat. Then he turned. Mounted. Looked back once, from horseback. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Elias agreed. "It probably isn't." Callow rode south. His men followed. Elias stood alone in the flat afternoon light, revolver still in hand, listening to the hoofbeats fade. The wind moved through the dry grass of the western field, and the fence he'd been mending stood half-finished behind him, and somewhere in the distance, one of his cattle lowed, a long, mournful sound that could mean anything or nothing at all. He holstered his gun. His hand was steady. That surprised him. He picked up his hammer and went back to finishing the fence. The letter from Austin arrived 6 weeks later. It was not what Elias had hoped for, but it was something. The land commissioner acknowledged receipt of his correspondence and the documentation forwarded by Rosa Delgado on behalf of her grandmother. An inquiry was opened. The land grant records from 1871 would be reviewed. No promises were made. No timelines given. The language was careful and bureaucratic, the language of institutions that move the way glaciers move, slowly, reluctantly, with enormous force applied across enormous time. It was something. Whether it would become anything more remained to be seen. Esperanza Vega died on a Tuesday morning in late May, 3 weeks after Elias had sat beside her bed and accepted her bundle of dried herbs. Rosa sent word by a boy from town, a message written on a folded piece of paper in careful, small handwriting. She went quietly, in the early morning. She was not in pain. In her last good hours, she told me the names. All of them. I have written them down as I promised. 2 days later, Rosa rode out to Flat Rock. She brought the list. Elias read it at the kitchen table. 23 names. Families. Some with the number of children beside them. Some with the year they'd arrived in the settlement, and the year they'd been driven out. Some with a single word beside them, remained, displaced, died, each word carrying the gravity of a whole life compressed into syllables. He read every name aloud. Quietly to himself. It felt important to say them in the air of the place where those people had lived. When he was done, he looked up. Rosa was watching him. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. It was the same question he'd been asking himself for 6 weeks. Every morning at the eastern ridge. Every evening looking at the survey map on the wall. Every time he rode past the ruins in the shallow valley, and saw the handmade cross still leaning in the dirt. "I've been thinking about that cross," he said. "My grandfather made it," Rosa said, "to mark the foundation of the house that was burned. He put it there the night before they left." Elias nodded. He reached into his coat pocket and put something on the table between them. A folded piece of paper. She picked it up and opened it. It was a document. Legal language, notarized, bearing the seal of the county clerk in redemption. She read it carefully. She read it again. "This gives my family legal access to the eastern ridge," she said slowly. "Water rights to the canyon creek. Permanent." She looked up. "You had this drawn up?" "Rode to town last week," he said. "Lawyer named Bertram. Costs a fee. It's binding. This is your land. Some of it, yes. And some of it is something I've been tending on behalf of people who should still be there." He looked at the list of names on the table. "I can't give back what was taken. I don't have that power. The commissioner in Austin may do something. More likely, he won't do enough. That's the honest truth of it." He folded his hands. "But I can do this. I can make it a matter of record that your family has a right here. That Esperanza Vega's people have a right here. Something on paper. Something that says, in whatever language the law speaks, these people are not invisible." Rosa looked at the document for a long time. Something moved across her face, not happiness exactly, because happiness would have been wrong for the weight of the moment. Something more complex. Something that contained grief and recognition and a cautious, qualified hope all at once. "She would have wanted to see this," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry it took me longer than it should have." She looked at him. "You didn't know." "No," he said. "But I should have asked?" The silence between them was different from the silence that had been in the room all those weeks ago when she'd first explained what the land held. This silence had something in it. Not resolution. The inquiry in Austin was still open, Callow had been conspicuously quiet in ways that made Elias more watchful rather than less. And the gap between what was right and what the law would actually do remained as wide as the territory itself. But something. They rode out to the eastern ridge in the late afternoon. The light was the color of old brass, warm and a little melancholy, the way the desert light gets when the day is almost done but hasn't accepted it yet. At the ruins in the shallow valley, Elias dismounted. He walked to the handmade cross and crouched beside it. He pressed it back into the earth with his hands, firmer, more vertical than it had been. He stood. He took the list of names from his pocket. He read them aloud again, one by one, in the open air of the valley, with the canyon wall catching and holding each sound the way stone holds heat. Rosa stood beside him and listened. When he was done, she said 3 of the names again herself, quietly, in the way you say the names of the specific dead, the ones that belong to you. They stood at the ruins for a while without speaking. On the ride back, as the sun was nearly gone and the first stars were appearing over the ridge, Rosa said, "My grandmother used to say that the land doesn't forget. People forget. The land keeps the record." Elias looked at the ground passing under his horse's hooves. The scrub grass, the pale dust, the old flint stones catching the last light. All of it containing, in ways he never thought to consider, everything that had ever happened on its surface. She was right, he said. Ward Callow was indicted by a federal land commission 8 months later. The charges were narrow, procedural fraud in the 1871 redistribution, and the punishment was narrower still. A fine. A formal censure. No prison. He retained most of his land. The law moved the way it moved, which was partially, and slowly, and in favor of the people who already had things. But the inquiry created a public record. The land grant from the Vega family was officially acknowledged, not restored, but acknowledged. The documentation entered the county ledger. It was there. On paper. In ink. In the permanent, imperfect, essential language of the record. It wasn't justice. Not the full kind. Not the kind that balances every account and rights every wrong and gives back what was taken with interest and an apology. That kind of justice is rare as water in August in this part of the world. Maybe in any part of the world. But it was something that could not be undone. Rosa continued to come to the eastern ridge with the seasons. For berries in spring. For root herbs in fall. Sometimes she brought her children, 2 boys who ran between the berry thickets with the boundless, unconscious energy of children who do not yet know that a place can be complicated. Sometimes she brought nothing but herself, and sat near the ruins for a while in the way that people sit near the graves of the ones they loved. Elias always left the eastern gate open when she was expected. He added names to his survey map. Not the boundary lines, the measurements, the legal descriptions. He added names. The families. Written in his cramped handwriting in the margins of the map, running up the side and along the bottom where there was white space. It made the map crowded and impractical and more accurate than it had ever been. He kept it on the wall. Every morning before he rode out, he looked at it. At the lines and the names. At the shape of the land and the shape of the people who had been part of it. At the cross in the valley that he'd straightened with his own hands and that the map now marked, in his handwriting, with a single word, here. He lived on Flat Rock for 31 more years. He ran cattle, mended fence, survived drought, survived bad winters, survived the slow transformation of the territory into something that called itself modern and largely wasn't. He never married. He never left. When he died, quietly, in the ranch house, in the winter of 1913, in the second chair at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee at his elbow, and the window showing him the eastern ridge in morning light, they found the survey map still on the wall. They found the list of 23 names in the table drawer. And they found, on a piece of paper with no heading and no explanation, written in his careful and unhurried handwriting, a single sentence. The hardest thing a man can do is stop looking at the land he owns and start looking at the land he holds. Nobody knew what it meant at first. Some people thought it was a legal statement. Some thought it was religious. Rosa Delgado, who was 63 years old by then, and who had known Elias Crane for 31 years and perhaps understood him better than anyone, read it and was quiet for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. She took it home. She kept it. Some truths are too hard for a document. Too large for a ledger. They live in the places between the lines on the map, in the soil, in the cross, in the names said aloud in an empty valley, in the open gate, in the berries gathered at the canyon wall. In the things a man does, imperfectly and too late, when he finally stops looking away. The land doesn't forget. It keeps the record. We only have to be willing to read it,